G'day everyone, I'm Ebony Bennett. I'm Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and welcome to today's webinar, AI Killing the Media Star. I want to begin by acknowledging that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend that welcome to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us on the webinar today. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. We're really excited about today's webinar. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. I'm not Richard Dennis, who was due to be hosting this webinar today. Unfortunately, his plane was running a little bit late. So I'm going to kick things off here, and Richard might join us in a little bit when he arrives. But I did just want to start with a bit of housekeeping for new people to the webinar series. You can ask questions and type them in using the Q&A box on Zoom. Just type those in, and later in the webinar, we'll hopefully get to some questions from the audience. Best put them in now if you've got them or as you think of them so that we can get to them as soon as we can. A reminder that this is live and we do moderate the chat, so please keep things civil and on topic or we'll boot you out. And lastly, a reminder that this is being recorded and the video will go up on the Australia Institute's website and our YouTube channel later in the day, hopefully. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited. Obviously, AI is such a huge topic in the media at the moment, and we're delighted to be bringing you a couple of really special guests. First of all, joining me is Clive Marshall, the former CEO at the Press Association in the UK for about 14 years, and prior to that, CEO at Australian Associated Press for 10 years. He's currently the chair of the NLA Media Access, chair of Bayes Group, president of the Kosovo Press and the Kosovo News Agency, member of the nominations committee of Thomson Reuters Trust as well. Thanks for joining us, Clive.
Thank you.
And also joining us is Emma Cowdroy. She's the acting CEO at Australian Associated Press and currently Director of News Media Coalition UK, Director of Clean Up Australia, and serves on the nominations committee of Thomson Reuters Foundation as well. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So before we get started, Clive, I can see we've got Richard about to come in and take over from me. But while Richard comes into the studio and before we hand over, I'll just duck out and let Richard come in. But for people at home who aren't aware, first of all, before we get stuck into AI, can you explain what a news wire service is and the kind of role that something like AAP plays in journalism in a country like Australia?
So a news agency and the news agency wire service is normally at the heart of the news ecosystem in virtually every country in the world. And the news wire is a wholesale service provided by the news agency that provides the building blocks for the news media, whether that's broadcasters, radio, newspapers, primarily in the old days, digital platforms that can take elements from the news agency and then add their own input to create the products that their readers, their listeners, their viewers are looking for.
So if you're kind of a local news paper and you don't have a huge number of staff, you could use the newswire.
Use the newswire, and most newswires and most news agents are focused on the domestic, their own country content, but there would be some big global news agencies like Reuters, like Associated Press, like Agence France Presse as well.
Yeah, wonderful. I might just invite Richard Dennis in. Nice to see you, everyone, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Oh, it's all very exciting here today. Thanks so much, Ed. Nice to meet you, Clive.
Yes, nice to meet you.
If only on air. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Richard.
So I just heard, thank you. I just heard Ebony's first question. Sorry, my plane was late. Emma, just on that, so to make that really clear for Australians, so in Australia, AAP would go to press conferences, cover what the Prime Minister said, cover what, happened in a court case, and then just make that available to any newspaper, big or small, in Australia or around the world.
Yes, that's correct, as long as they're subscribers
Of course.
to the service. And then certainly in the past, that was pretty much the entire media in Australia would have taken it. And the reason that that model works, why a wholesale model works, is because it's a pooled service. And so there are efficiencies for all media and also regional remote and regional papers can get access to a service that they would just not be able to send their own reporters to. And it works because there's an economy in that.
Yeah.
And then obviously, I jumping in, but we do still supply to most media in Australia, just not News Corp.
Yeah. So we'll come to News Corp in a minute, but obviously the media is under pressure in Australia and around the world. Less and less people are subscribing, to newspapers. The classified advertising's dried up. So that means their revenues are declining. Does that mean they've been increasingly relying on, because we're going to talk about AI in a minute, but before there was AI, there was a wire service. As their revenues were drying up around the world, Clive, have news wires sort of blossomed, or are they struggling too?
So I think the use of the newswire is blossoming. I think the ability of the newswire customers to pay more for those services is declining. So you've got this, this real dichotomy between greater demand for content and a lower ability to pay for that content.
Yeah, so more desperate customers for the content, but more desperate customers in terms of the revenue.
Yeah.
Is that the Australian experience?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I've often said, and it sounds trite, but it is true, that when our customers sneeze, we catch the cold. So, and that has certainly been AAP's experience.
Okay, so there's another way that newspapers can save money, and that is they can go with AI. So, obviously what we want to talk a bit about today is the consequences of that. Yeah. And we can come back to how AI and newswires interact. But I don't know if most people watching today have thought too hard about what's happening around the world with newspapers and how are they using AI today?
So I think today, and I think the take-up is different in different marketplaces, and part of that will be driven by the pressures the media are under in those markets. But most of the focus around AI for the news media will be around products and process. And I think most have probably started off with process because it's easier. They've got their processes. They know where those processes are.
What do you mean? Imagine I didn't work at a newspaper. What process?
Yeah, so processes could be applying metadata to content that makes it easy to be searchable.
Yeah.
It could be using AI to identify people in pictures. So you take a photograph of the Prime Minister with somebody, but there could be 6 other people in the picture. Nobody at the time would have captured those people, but maybe later those people are in the news and you need to know you've got a photograph of those people.
And AI might be used.
AI could do that in a blink of an eye.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe accurately. I just mean there's been some instances recently with journalists putting the wrong names under people, and now I'm wondering.
And that was a problem even before AI.
Of course.
The key is you've got to have professional people and human intervention to check it.
Yeah. Emma, what have you seen in Australia with use of AI in the Australian media?
So I think we would see AI, or certainly I can speak for AAP's use of it. It's primarily as an enhancement rather than as a replacement. And that's certainly been our approach to it. So there is human touch right throughout. I think probably we are a low adopter because we still do primary source journalism, and primary source journalism is what other people might know as shoe leather journalism, and that is not easily, that is not able to be replaced by AI from our perspective.
So I don't know if this is common in Australia or not, but I've read that News Corp papers are using AI to help kind of generate story ideas and possibly even to teach people how to write in other people's voices. Is that something you're aware of?
I mean, I am sure. I'm not familiar with what's happening at News Corp, but I think the power and the ability of AI to assist, provided it's got the right guardrails and you're applying that, could be anything from. I remember when I was running PA, Man United football team in the UK had a terrible start to the season. The newsroom, the sports journalists had written many stories about why Man United had started so badly. And I remember the editor saying to me that they'd gone onto one of the platforms and they said, what could we look at about why it's been such a lousy start to the season? And he was a skeptic and he said, it's amazing. 6 of the ideas we'd already run, but there were 2 we had never thought of. So then they're applying their journalistic skills and then that's to the benefit of the newsroom, benefit of the audience for that content as well.
So that's already happening.
So that's already happening. I think getting ideas for headlines, if you can certainly see plenty of commentary about how newsrooms are using AI to give them suggestions that they would then adapt in their own style. So, it's another resource, but just like Google search was a resource before that. And I've been in the industry long enough to remember all the paper archives where you'd go down in the basement to get all the paper clippings. It's a resource you've got to be cautious, and you've got to apply your skills to them. It's just the speed is so much quicker now that, a paper archive, you could make a mistake and spot it and correct it. Now it's in an instance, isn't it?
So, Emma, you were saying before that, if your customers sneeze, you catch a cold. I assume in Australia, most of your customers, the AAP customers, are the smaller regional outlets, and I presume they're less well placed to use AI in these positive ways that Clive's talking about. Is that what you observe?
I would say that is probably correct. I think that the flip side to what Clive's talking about, which is the process, the enhancement concept, is the product concept. And I think the problem, for newsrooms in regional Australia, and they will not have the ability the power to be able to negotiate with the platforms to be able to get appropriate compensation for the use of their content. So without that money coming in to replace the money that's going to be lost, they'll have less money to be able to invest to be able to look at whether they can enhance their processes.
Yeah, and I guess one of the big things with AI, and I must admit I'm a user of technology, and Google was AI before it was called AI.
Yeah.
I'm not anti-tech, but I must admit I think we overuse the term intelligence when we're talking about AI. I think we think the computer's going to give us all the great ideas, but leaving that aside, Emma, at the moment I think I've heard that, go back one step, AI is only as good as what it's trained on. Yeah. And if it's garbage in, garbage out.
Sure.
If AI is reading nonsensical stuff on social media and then turning nonsensical social media into a summary of what the people are thinking, that's quite different from if AI is trained on the internal documents of an organization like law firms do, or I presume, I don't know, historic AAP content. Like what's the role for something like AAP, or indeed other media outlets, for kind of training AI well?
Yeah, well, I think that's a big question, and the reason it's a big question is because, yes, you want, if AI, and it is here to stay, and it's going to overtake all of us very, very quickly. If it's here to stay, you want it to be trained on a range of voices, because if it's not trained on a range of voices, you're going to end up with the loudest voice in the market becoming the dominant theme of the information that it surfaces. And so, but the problem, of course, is if it's been trained on a range of voices, you want those people like us to be compensated for it. And it's incredibly difficult to get that compensation. And we've been trying, we've used some international consultants to try and help us. And we've only been successful in one arrangement.
So how would that, obviously this came up at the Productivity Commission roundtable recently. Australian writers, I don't know if you were in Australia for this, Clive, but
I just saw
Australian writers were urged, just give it all away for free. Why not donate your intellectual property to tech moguls? It'll help the country. I mean, the idea that anyone would go along with that, I thought was bonkers. But you're saying, Emma, it's hard to get people to pay. Is there a market for high quality stuff to train AI on, or do they want it for free?
I think that horse is already bolted, isn't it? Because the AI platforms, basically, I use my words, would be they basically help themselves to everything. They stole it all. So it's all sitting there in their large language models. I think some of them that have obviously got an awful lot of capital are starting to set up arrangements where they're paying for some of the content, like News Corp, like the Financial Times. Like
just to stop, who's paying who there? That's
so the large language models are actually buying a license, but that's probably for the ongoing.
That's it's usually the live feed.
Yeah, the live feed. And
so they've stolen it all in the past, but they're paying for the updates.
For the updates, because that's where the value is, isn't it? Because otherwise they're locked in time. So I think I mean, I wonder whether what we're seeing at the moment is what we saw with the news when Google and the others helped themselves to all the news services all those years ago and never paid anybody. And then slowly, some of them started to pay a little bit, didn't they, to legalize what they were doing. And I think we're starting to see that with AI, but we'll only see it with the good, well-funded AI platforms that are that way inclined. And what really worries me in Australia would be, that's fine. So News Corp can negotiate, Nine Fairfax can negotiate. But if you're a small regional newspaper and they've helped themselves to your content and they're helping themselves to your live stories, and if you go on ChatGPT today, OpenAI, and say, are AI platforms going behind the paywall and helping themselves to content? They say yes. Which is quite amazing. So these small regional media groups, whether it's radio, TV, digital, are not going to get recompensed, and they have no muscle to negotiate with these people. Whether the government can step in and do that for them,
Yeah. So back up, because a lot of people won't probably, when they're reading the newspaper, think, oh, how much of this came from a newswire service? That's Australian consumers of the media. Probably they might see AAP, or they might see AFP down there. So let's just back up. I'm reading my local newspaper. It's going to have content in there, likely from an Australian wire service, or an international wire service. In that sense, you're using the term before, it's a wholesaler. It's going to the press conference once, it's going to the court case once, it's writing the facts of the story once, and then people can either take that as you wrote it, or they can add on top of that. So if that's the wholesale service, it seems like a pretty important service. As an economist, I'd say it's, essential infrastructure that other news is built on top of. But Emma, this is a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, I suppose, but I don't actually know the answer. So if your customers can't afford to pay and the AI companies won't pay, how do we actually keep this essential bit of democratic infrastructure going? What's your plan?
Well, that has been the challenge for AAP for the last 5 years. Obviously, we were owned by News and Nine primarily, with some smaller shareholdings from West Australian News and ACM. We were nearly closed. We were saved into a new model, not-for-profit charity. You've seen that we've had government funding, and I think that primary source journalism, which is that's what we do. Shoe leather journalism, primary source journalism, factual, accurate, independent reporting, which allows others, it's the building blocks of the ecosystem, it allows others to put their opinion and their perspective and to do other stories. That needs to be government funding for that. So there is a public benefit, and we are a public service in part. And I think that if you look at newswires around the globe, that would be the case in the vast majority of countries. And the reason for that is that if you look at newswires globally, there's probably only, and Clive will correct me on this because I think there is 8 commercially viable newswires that essentially where they have enough diversification of their business models to be able to underpin the costs of running a newswire. Because I would be very surprised if there is a newswire, if you extrapolated out all the diversified businesses that could wash its face. I don't think that exists. But they are in markets that are far less concentrated than Australia, and and those organisations have access to capital and can diversify. So in smaller countries, the government, and not even such small countries actually, France, Agence France Presse receives 130 odd million in funding from the French government because they see that as a vital service and a conduit of information, cultural information and other information about France. And they were there is a concern that if they don't have that, if that evaporates from the ecosystem, that it's going to have a very detrimental effect on that democracy.
So, Clive, I'll ask you what else is happening internationally, but again, just to clarify, because I just don't think most people think about this, and I think a lot of people watching will think, yeah, okay, I know the Australian media is in trouble. It might, you can understand why people think government's got a role, the ABC, the SBS is part of that. But really what you're saying is when governments support a newswire service, they're actually supporting all the other news agencies,
Yeah.
all the other mastheads that rely on that. So it's a kind of cheap way to help them all without having the, I don't know, I don't think it's a problem, but without actually the government then controlling what the news editorial line at the ABC is.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely critical. And in a democracy like Australia, you must be able to put the guardrails in place to ensure, as you already have with government funding, that they don't interfere with the editorial process. That wouldn't be the case in other parts of the world like China or Russia, where they would fund the news agency and they would expect it to march to its tune. So I think that's the critical thing.
Yeah.
I think the other important thing, having run AAP for 10 years, is it's the Australian voice. You have a different voice, you have a different perspective on the world, and you have a region where you want to ensure that your soft power is also available to media in the Pacific and Southeast Asia as well. And I think the danger with AI is that the Australian voice is going to disappear, because it's very, very clear that the large language training was done primarily on American English content, some UK content, and recently, when I've done some searches on some of these platforms, it comes back and says, we don't have that answer because we've trained ourselves on Anglo-Saxon and American data.
Yeah, I says that.
And it says that, because I asked it about females running news agencies in the light of Emma's appointment, and they missed 5 or 6. I said, well, what happened to the Albanian lady? And what happened to the Norwegian lady? Yeah, but we're not trained on the data that has that content in it, and that's very difficult, So I think there is a role for government, and I think in the current economic environment, it's hard to imagine. I think it's fine in the UK, where you've got a very, very large news media ecosystem, highly competitive, big marketplace, and the agency's got access to capital. They can find their way forward. The Germans would be the same, but in a highly concentrated media marketplace like Australia, how could AAP diversify? It's impossible, and they're capital constrained as well.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the decline of commercial opportunities, as we've said before, customers sneeze, we catch the cold. Philanthropy has filled the gap to a level, but it's not able to fill it to the level that is required. And I think even News Corp have publicly said that it is appropriate that AAP is funded from public money.
And well, I think that's a key point, because someone's got to pay for this, and keep coming back to the obvious. The newspapers say they're not in a position to. The AI companies say they won't. We've talked about the government funding, but in Europe, I suspect not in the US, but is anyone around the world kind of taking this more seriously, saying to the AI companies, come on, you trained it on all this, you admit you trained it on all of this. Do we just have to accept that because they got away with a past theft, it's theirs forever?
Well, I think they're quite clever, to be honest, because I think they're clever enough to drag this through court cases in the hope that by the time they come out, that it's going to take so long to get the compensation that in the meantime, either their models will have moved on, or the people suing them will have collapsed. Really, I think that's been the strategy. And if you look at Perplexity's announcement, it is to great hoo-ha. There was an announcement of $42.6 million of a fund of revenue sharing on their product for the media. That is a ridiculously small amount across all the global media to share in a fund that's 42 or whatever it was. It was a very, US dollars. You think about what it costs. We know that there are hidden costs to the creation of journalism that no one would be aware of. And it is an expensive business, and it's expensive because you've got to get it right. And if you get it wrong, it has a whole series of consequences, including, an erosion of trust in the media. So,
and overnight, Financial Times have announced that they are suing Perplexity.
Yeah. So obviously the announcement. Yeah.
And we haven't talked about Images, but Getty Images at the very outset took out a case against Stable Diffusion as well. So there are these court cases going on, but I think the bigger issue in the background is the current government in the US is putting enormous pressure on Western democracies not to bring in digital tax. and not to stop their large platforms from training their models. And I'm sure the Australian government would deny that they're being affected by it. The British government are denying, but their very behaviour would suggest in the UK that they are being affected by these pressures because they're just kicking the can down the road. And I think it's probably too late. The training has been done.
Well, I don't know that people who've been charged with historic theft will be able to get away with this argument, but I certainly, no, I mean that. Like, it seems that we're in this remarkable situation of people, I'm sure I took it, but what are you going to do about it? But I guess that the challenge for us in a democracy is that, as you say, Emma, the shoe leather cost, of reporting the facts really is expensive. So I guess, again, on that, I don't think people think too hard about this, but AI can't go to a press conference and ask a question. AI can't sit in the back of a court and describe what's happening. AI can't show up on the scene of any form of tragedy and describe what's happening. So what's happening to media around the world if they're spending less and less time on those facts? What do you think the costs to our democracy of not covering events anymore is?
Well, I think there is going to be a huge cost to our democracy, and I think it's going to accelerate on us at a pace that none of us could foresee. And I think journalism is actually in peril. And it's not going to be. I mean, Clive and I were both at a meeting recently by someone who has a lot of experience in AI, and we were told, and we've been told subsequent to this, that this was an underestimation of the power of AI, that in 2 years' time it's going to be 10 times better, which means in 4 years' time it's going to be 100 times better. So 100 times better at doing what it is doing now. So the disruption to some industries will use it and it will be highly beneficial to them, but for journalism, I think it's going to be highly corrosive. And I think in that context, the impacts on democracy are going to be significant because there is a possibility that it's going to be the company with the biggest pockets left standing. And it certainly would be the case if there was no viable wholesaler in the market, that is going to be fully exacerbated. And I don't think this is a dystopian universe, years away. I think this is on our doorstep.
Clive, what do you reckon?
I think it's AI is moving so quickly. You talk to what Emma just said about the speed of its improvement, that we're going to need 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years, to get the whole thing to settle down and really understand. And I think there's massive challenges. We talked about a lot of them today. I think there's also great opportunities as well. And I think as every bit of new technologies come through, we've got to keep our minds open about how do we exploit it for the good, for our industry, make sure that all of the guardrails, as you would call them, are in place, so that people can trust the content, that in the process we don't destroy the public's trust in our news and information services. And capitalize on it. You talked about press conferences. Some press conferences are being recorded, available on video. I mean, AI is very good at turning a voice into text.
Yes, but who asks the question?
Yeah,
but then the question has to come from, then the journalists have got to be there to do that.
Yeah.
And
it's the primary source. You've got to have primary source journalism. And I think actually in an AI world, the commodity is going to become trust. Because ultimately, if you're, so that's what has to be recognised in that ecosystem. Because if you don't have information that people can trust, you'll turn away from AI platforms, but it will be too late.
Well, I guess that's where I'm heading. Like, I don't know much about this in the day-to-day sense, but again, AI can only analyze the information that's in front of it.
Yeah, because it's just pattern matching.
It's just pattern matching, right? That's fine and that's useful, and yes, it can transcribe this. And to be clear, at the Institute, we use online transcription services, which I'm sure are powered by AI. So again, I'm not anti-tech, but again, a human actually still has to go and ask a question.
Yeah, they do.
And unless we're at the stage where the robots are asking the Prime Minister questions at press conferences, I guess where I'm heading, Emma, is this actually feels like it's potentially a big opportunity for newswires, because no one else is going to want to do the work, the shoe leather work of being there, reporting what happened, take the photo. Like the AI might be able to tell you who's in the photo,
Yeah.
but again, I'm guessing that if there's a car
Someone's got to take
crash
the picture.
or an earthquake,
Yeah.
a human actually has to show up. So what are you complaining about? This should be a great opportunity.
Well, someone's got to fund it though,
The
Richard.
funding.
That's
Oh, okay.
the issue.
funding is-
Who is funding it? And if
Yeah.
you can't drag the AI companies to the table,
Yeah.
and your customers are being cannibalized, their businesses are being cannibalized by the AI platforms, then someone has to fund it. And I think in a market like Australia, it will require intervention from the government.
And they've done that so far, and I think that's been fantastic in a country like Australia. The governments, and it was a different government, was it, recognised that this funding is needed to be put in place. It's been put in place, but
Right. Well, I'm in the sort of position of host today, but I am an economist, so let's think online here. How much a year is the government giving you at the moment?
So they've announced
Ballpark?
They've announced 11 million a year for 3 years.
Okay. So what an economist would call that is rounding error.
Yeah.
Right.
No, this is the reality
right.
is
Yeah,
the Australian government spent $700 billion last year.
Yeah.
$700 billion. 11 million is so few decimal places it just wouldn't make it into the budget. So what you're saying is that if the federal government puts significant money into something like a wire service, that every other newspaper in the country is supported by that. The politicians themselves get their press conferences covered. The courts are happy. The sport gets covered. I hadn't thought of sport, but I'm thinking the AI can't go watch the sport either or take the photo. So, I mean, this seems like a huge opportunity. A little bit of money from the government provides not just a service that's already important, but in a world where AI is desperate to have something to evaluate, surely this is the sweet spot for why.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think on the basis that all the stories are credited to AAP. So if somebody finds the story on AI, they can see the AAP logo, they can see the source.
But it also becomes, in a model or in a scenario where you are properly resourcing the national newswire, you are providing a natural antidote to mis and disinformation, because you are flooding the market with factual, trusted, accurate content.
So on that, and I'm just getting questions from people.
Sure.
I'll start asking some of the questions from our audience soon. But just on that, like, if I'm reading the paper, I'll often see Agence France Presse or AAP at the bottom. Should I, if a newspaper is using AI, and also you'll see bylines, the journalist's name, should I and do newspapers currently tell me if AI is kind of writing copy, or it's not doing that project yet? So it's hypothetical.
Look, I think that it very much depends on what the policy of the news organisation that you are reading has in place. So I think a lot of them will say this was prepared with the help of AI, if it was in fact done, and that's what I would consider to be leading organisations.
So is that happening now? Like if I picked up a
Definitely
paper
around images.
images. Okay.
So particularly, I mean, AI is very good at, if there's a story and you want a whole melange of pictures to create a graphic, then AI may be better to do that than putting it into a different process. So my experience is that they are saying it's been created with the help of AI. And that I think that's the case.
But are there stories written anywhere in the world at the moment that say, thanks to AI for helping me write this? Because I know we're telling students they have to say that when they're at uni.
And of course, Amazon says that on their review page. Says it's created with the help of AI. I don't know any examples in Australia.
I don't know examples where that is being put into a printed product.
Should it be? Like, it's going to be 100 times better in 10 years' time, I've just learned, or 4 years' time?
I think if AI is generating the content, yes. If AI is just helping you to sort through the choices that the journalist then makes on top, then that's no different than using Google search, is it, at that point?
Yeah, okay. So, well, I guess that's going to be one to watch with the bylines. Now, one of the questions that we've just got from one of the audience here is, basically, this is from Antonio. What does this mean for traditional journalism? And I know you've already touched on this, but, there's journalists watching today. What does this mean for traditional journalism, and what can be done to find a balance between, the role of traditional journalists and AI.
So I do not think there is a replacement for primary source journalism. I think that, and I think in a world where trust becomes, and I haven't worked out who's paying for it yet, I should say.
But 700 billion, we'll get you the money.
But in a world where trust is even more valued and is essential. I mean, if you saw in an AI source, something that has surfaced on, you've done a ChatGPT search and you've seen an AAP logo as the sourced story underneath, you're going to trust that because you will know that that is something that has been it's been created through journalistic skill. It's been subject to professional ethics. It's been appropriately gone through editorial processes, and it has been produced in accordance with certain standards. So there is a whole package behind a piece of journalism that is trusted, that I think that role is going to be even more important in a world where you're getting what is synthetic content and or AI slop.
Synthetic content means?
So synthetic content is content that is just a sort of essentially an amalgamation.
Made up stuff.
It's just grabbing from and this is what AI does, right? Yeah. And I mean, Clive will tell you that about, I mean, just the story yesterday about the Iranian story with it. You explain that.
So the Iranian story, the expulsion of the Iranian ambassador, within minutes of that being made, was on all of the AI platforms that we looked at. But
it was a compilation, Richard. So it's gone behind and it's just grabbed, a bit of here and a bit of there and a bit of there and a bit there, and it's created a story. And synthetic content is then essentially AI applying a story, can be an AI overlay on that story. So it's getting further and further from the source of truth as it keeps working its way through the ecosystem.
And it guesses as well. I mean, here's a wonderful anecdote that I asked one of the platforms the sorts of questions you would ask us today. Okay. But I misspelt your name. So it came back and said, if there was a person called Richard blah, blah, blah at the Australian Institute, these are the sorts of questions he might have asked you. So it never comes back and says no answer. It always comes back with something.
That's the old joke about economists. We don't answer because we know. We answer because we were asked.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder, the journalists do a fantastic job and they're an absolute cornerstone to our democracy. And what they love is they love covering the story, providing their insights, providing the content to their viewers, their listeners, and their readers. But what they hate is the drudgery. And I think if newsrooms focus on how can AI remove the drudgery and allow our great journalists to do more of what they love doing. And some people would say that it's not AI that will cost people their jobs. What will cost people their jobs is not understanding how AI can help them do their jobs better. And I think in our newsrooms, we've got to embrace AI. We've got to train our colleagues, and it's not about reducing the number of employees. It's about freeing them up to do more and more of the work that they should be doing.
So when you were talking before, Emma, I was thinking that, and I must admit, I'm not a very heavy user of ChatGPT or anything. I've used it, but for the kind of work I do day to day, I don't really need that. But when you were talking, I thought, well, maybe I should just tell ChatGPT only tell me things from these kind of sources. I mean, isn't there potentially an opportunity either for an AI company to say, I'm a good AI company, my stuff's not made up crap, or do we need to educate users to say, when you're asking it a question, don't just ask it to see what it can find, tell it to go and look at summarize what AAP has said about this rather than what random folks have said.
And I think it's so important. So I talked to an expert on AI in London before I came out, and I've got two daughters, one late 20s, one early 30s. And when they go onto the search engines, they don't use the AI summary because they are skeptical about the summary. But when I talked to this specialist, he said, that's fine for your daughters, but Generation Z and Generation Alpha, the younger generations, they only use the AI summary. So I think education in the schools with young people, getting them to understand how news works.
But that also,
sources.
but your summary, though, Richard, relies on AAP and that content being in the ecosystem in the first place.
Absolutely.
So,
got to be there.
So Gavin's asked a related question, and that is, are there opportunities for legitimate, not-for-profit think tanks, NGOs, philanthropic institutions, etc., to provide an AI news type service that filters out the bullshit and provides consumers with real news? So, yeah, is there going, I don't know that that's a role of a think tank, but maybe someone else is going to make news services that promise their AI only comes from trusted sources.
And that's what news agencies do. So if you think about AAP, they've got their own great journalism, but they're also taking feeds in from Reuters, from Associated Press, from Agence France Presse. So as a wholesaler, the customers of AAP or PA in London know they can trust the content that's coming down the wire to them because it's from a trusted source.
but again, it comes back to, it's got to be, there's still got to be primary source journalism to actually feed any of those machines. Because if you don't, if we have a contraction of the news media or a decimation of the news media, there won't be anyone doing the public, the shoe leather journalism to actually be fed into those models.
Yeah. No, look, I think it's fascinating, but I guess it's obvious to me. I don't know if you've thought about this. It's a pretty abstract thing, but once upon a time, fire brigades were private. Indeed, fire brigades were funded by insurance companies. And once people had insured their house against fire, it was in the interest of the insurance company
To put it out.
To put it out, except when your neighbour's house caught fire. And when your neighbour's house caught fire, and the insurance company funded fire truck showed up and didn't put it out, you know what ended up happening? Your house burned down. So at some point we went, you know what would make a lot more sense is if we actually publicly funded what was once a private service and made it an essential service. So hearing you talk today, Emma, I think it's just obvious, which doesn't mean it will happen, that if we're interested in our democracy, we're just going to have to fund this shoe leather. But maybe this one's for you, Clive. Ines has texted in saying, or he messaged in and someone's texted it to me, the EU has introduced rules around how AI should not be used. What's Australia doing to regulate the use of AI? Or maybe that's for you too.
I think it's I think it's for both of us really, but you can start with the UK.
With the UK, I think at the moment there is no sense that they're going to regulate AI. I think under pressure from from the Trump administration, they've done a consultation. The House of Lords pushed back, and I think in the end have rolled over because the House of Lords is a revisioning chamber. It can't dictate to the government. And I think there'll be a white paper and it'll go through the process, and the large language models will not have to pay the copyright fees, which is very sad, particularly for all of the originators of that content. And it's not just news, it's all creative people.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, the issue is if they're regulating AI, what are they regulating it in one industry, in all industries, it's going, I think it's a pretty challenging proposition.
Yeah.
Now, I know we've touched on this, but I think this question kind of highlights how, most Australians probably aren't up to speed on just how scary all this might be and what we need to do about it. So I'll ask it again anyway. Is there a danger of a feedback loop where AI reads its own material and that material gets used to become the input for future AI?
100%. 100%. And in fact, I think Clive was telling me a story earlier today where AI models now prefer to train on their own content, on their own model.
So this is a dystopian society we're living in, is it? I think.
So in economics, when we kind of come up with our little models and sometimes get carried away, the phrase high on our own supply comes up. It sounds like AI maybe is already scouring the internet to find content that was made
off AI and they didn't know. And I think that's the, it'll be very interesting to see what the role of government is. I think, and it may be that in some marketplaces, the platforms are forced to pay some money towards the content. I think one of the other guardrails that needs to be brought in is there needs to be a takedown process. So when, and you talked about deep fakes, I think in previous podcasts, but when you see government ministers this fakery that creates a video of a government minister promoting a product which is clearly false, then there has to be an obligation on these platforms and on the AI platforms to remove that content immediately. And there's been this famous story in Europe of this poor Norwegian man where all the platforms said he'd killed his children. And now what happens is they say they were wrong, you know. But it's taken months before that's come about. And Billy Connolly, a comedian which was well loved in Australia, I remember when I was here, you know, I mean, he's having to put out messages saying that all of these promotions that are going out on the AI platforms, asking people to donate money to him, buy his products, is all false, you know. And they copy the voice, they copy the style.
Yes.
You know.
And we see that here in Australia also. Like, I'm often struck, I'll see an ad and I think, oh, that's John Howard. And then I think, no, it's not. No, but it's designed to make me think it is.
It is.
And, you know, it's clearly not, but everything about it is.
It is, yeah.
And for that sort of subconscious, it certainly attracts my attention. Oh, what's John Howard doing in that ad? Oh, he's not. It's an AI image of someone who's not John Howard, who on first glance
Is John Howard.
you know, for all intents and purposes, John Howard. So I guess relatedly, you know, the Norwegian example, I think, is an extreme one. Some of the Nordic countries have been earlier to step in, not so much in a news sense, but in protecting the intellectual property of someone's face. In protecting people from sort of the stealing of their personal attributes in these ways. That's not quite news, but it does suggest that countries can do things. Similarly, some of the Nordic countries were early adopters in saying, if you're going to take a photo of someone and then digitally manipulate it, put it in an ad and create unrealistic body images, well, you can do that, but you actually have to say, you know, may or may not resemble the human who, you know, once posed for this photo. Is labeling going to be a part of it, or is that horse bolted and we can't catch up?
As in having legislation to stop these things happening.
Well, stop these things happening, or say if you know, this content was created by AI, at least then you can tell another AI algorithm, don't be trusting the nonsense that's labeled that way. So but if it's not labeled,
no. So I think on the platforms that are selling imagery and video, they would be clear now whether it was created by AI. And often you're doing that yourself because you're selecting what sources it's bringing content in from. But yeah, I think it's, you know, in the end, will the technology evolve to be able to capture this false content? I mean, that's what you would hope would happen, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, at the Australia Institute, we're kind of keen on solving problems, and I think it is hard at the moment. The Trump administration have clearly kind of picked a side, you know, but Europe is bigger than the US, and Australia has agency in the world, and small Nordic countries are already acting. So, Emma, we've talked about how the state could step in to, you know, fund the shill of the journalism. That's obviously part of it. We've talked about teaching people to have trust in, you know, certain sources over others. But what other roles for government might there be? Because on the one hand, we could say, go find good stuff, but, you know, is it just on us to find the good stuff, or is there a role for government in trying to stamp out or label the bad stuff? Or that's just a little bit far down for AAP to have, because your competitors can make shit up. Like, that's, no, let's be clear, right? You're saying it costs a lot of money to do it properly. Okay, well, that's all right. It costs a lot of money to build a house that won't burn down. But you know what? We don't let people build the ones that will. So part of solving these problems is promoting the good stuff. Historically, you know, we've stepped in to say, no, you can't sell a car that's dangerous to drive. Is that part of it, or does the journalist in you just get scared and think, no, I don't want government, you know, telling people what news is or isn't?
No, I mean, I think, again, and I know I probably sound like I'm being fairly repetitive on this, but I actually think one of the natural antidotes to, and what you're describing essentially is an ecosystem of mis and disinformation, and I think we've all seen how problematic that has been to try and address. I think one of the natural antidotes to that, again, is accessibility of primary source, factual, accurate journalism. And again, I mean, look, you know, AAP is uniquely placed, almost the only well positioned as a wholesaler to be able to deliver that to the entire ecosystem. And so that's where I keep coming back to. We can't afford a situation where we have any loss of primary source journalism. So we may end up with a lot more AI generated content, synthetic content, whatever you want to call it, but we cannot have a situation where that has been at a loss of primary source journalism.
We've only got a few more minutes to go. I've got a couple more questions here from people watching. But Clive, who's doing it best around the world? Where can we learn the most from? And maybe the answer to this is obvious. Who's doing it the worst?
It was suggested the other day that Australia's been slow in the media to embrace AI, and so I think I don't know whether that makes Australia the slowest, but I would say, there's nothing wrong with evaluating it all and deciding you're not going to use AI. But I think what we're wrong is you don't evaluate the opportunities around AI and the risks and put all those things in place. I think in areas like Reuters, the Associated Press, the big behemoths of our industry, I think they're embracing AI, capitalizing on it, having the protections in place. And I think as smaller news agencies, we can learn from those organizations. And I think apropos of the previous question, I would be against the government legislating against people publishing content in a particular way, because that's infringing on people's freedom of expression, as long as it's not promoting terrorism or racism or whatever. But having quality information you can trust, like the AEP, is the antidote to that, isn't it? And you saw with your own chairman of the ABC got into quite a bit of trouble criticizing, was it Joe Rogan? The podcaster in the States.
Yep.
He has his right to his opinions. We may all disagree with them, but the world is probably not a worse place for that, as long as you've got the other side of the story, haven't you?
Yeah, or the third or the fourth side.
Yeah,
But I guess relatedly, and I know this is the point you've already made, Emma, but you can only have so many opinions about a small number of facts. If someone's not actually reporting
The
facts and what just happened in the world today, I think the opinions are going to eat themselves.
Yes.
So, all right. So I just want to, before I go to a couple of last questions, I'm trying to get a big sense from you guys. Yep, obviously government needs to step in and do something here.
Yeah.
There's a huge opportunity to help lots of media outlets at the retail level by investing in this at the wholesale level. But I don't know, that's the positive agenda. I'm really worried about this negative agenda of, well, what are we going to do about the misinformation? Because part of me fears that just flooding the zone with good stuff is not going to win in the flooding race because the bad stuff is so cheap. So it's not your fault. You're here to try and talk about the good stuff. But has anyone around the world tried to grapple with how to slow down the flood of bad stuff? Because I reckon this pool's going to get diluted pretty fast, no matter how many AAP journalists are picking up the facts.
And of course, the bad stuff is a subjective view, isn't it? What the Chinese or the Russians would view as bad stuff will be completely different to what the Australians or the British or the Americans would view. I think you've just got to do the good stuff really, really well. You've got to make sure that it's attributed to the sources, and you've probably got to get into your schools and educate young people about how content works and what the news industry is all about, and hope that that great journalism prevails.
Okay, so one of the questions here actually goes to that. Who in Australia is responsible for training people in how to do this? It's great. It's easy. And I hate to say it, we hear this all the time. Oh, the solution to financial scams is for kids to be able to identify scams. The solution to everything's an education campaign. So in Australia, Emma, whose job is that at the moment?
Well, you tell me.
I don't know. I haven't thought of it till today.
I know that we have done, so AAP has done a number of media literacy campaigns, and that has been around how to identify mis and disinformation, how to seek, how to look for trusted facts, how to seek them out, and trusted sources. So I think there needs to be there's going to have to be a wholesale program, because I think if you look at how younger people consume the news, it finds them. And so they are not, it comes to them on the various platforms. And I think that seeking it out is an entirely different skill, and it's going to have to be retrained.
Yeah, I think it is.
Is anyone doing it well around the world, or Clive, are we going to have
I
to
think
learn
in the-
this for ourselves?
I think you've got to learn it yourselves. You've got to have those structures in place. But I mean, there is a role for AAP in doing the journalism
Absolutely.
training.
Yeah.
PA in London, there's a lot of journalism training as well. It used to be that USAID would have supported a lot of that in the less developed countries. That sadly has fallen away now.
But I think it is primarily, I know that there's Squiz Kids in Australia. These are primarily, though, I haven't seen a concerted program at a governmental level that's addressing this in schools that I'm aware of. And I could be wrong about that, but certainly I know that we've taken a role in media literacy, and I think it's going to have to be part of a broader discussion.
And I'm guessing you've got journalism colleges in Australia. So that's another area, isn't it? But
Yeah, I think we're going to have to train more than the journalists, though. I think
Yeah,
it's
it's
the
the
customers.
It's the customers,
Yeah.
correct.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
both groups. Yeah, really.
Yeah. So there's a really interesting question from Virginia here, but I'll just give you some context before I ask it. I saw recently some numbers about, newspaper subscriptions and online traffic for Australian news, and it was, pretty dire stuff. So as someone who runs an organisation that makes things that people read, I went straight and said, well, how does our web traffic compare to that? And over the same period that the, subscription newspapers had sort of plummeted, over the last 12 months, the Australian Institute website traffic's doubled. So happy about that. But
Well done.
thank you.
I'm sure I'll be knocking on your door to find out how.
Well, yeah, I think, give people stuff they're interested in. And that's a long run up to this question, which I think is quite interesting. Is what we're talking about today, this is from Virginia, does it mean people might lose trust in the written word, and that radio and podcasting voices basically become a more trusted source? And the reason I link those two things is that, whenever I ask people, what is it that we do that you like, it's that there's a face and a name that I recognize that's telling me the stuff. And increasingly people are turning to a person they feel they can trust, whereas once upon a time they perhaps turned to a product they could trust. So you're in the written word business, Emma, so this is a tough question, but what do you think?
Look, I hear that, and I suspect that that would be true for some products, but I think it would be concerning for me on others, because a podcast is not going to go and sit in a courtroom and write a story about a case and sit there for 3 weeks. And
Unless mushrooms are involved.
well,
mushrooms are
maybe,
involved,
but they're still not sitting. They're not podcasting from the courtroom. They're doing a summation of what's happened.
Yeah.
I think that's that the skill of being the guardian of public knowledge is something that still requires, to my mind, a text and pictorial and video.
Video.
Yeah, but it still requires. It comes back to that primary source journalism.
Yeah.
I'll say it again, but that to me is a skill that you can't. They're complementary of each other, but they're not exclusive. And at the end of the day, those podcasts and newsletters, they're building on and extending what has been generated in the first instance.
But we should be pleased if young people are getting news and information from podcasts, then that's an improvement, isn't it? Rather than them just dropping out of engage. Was it Virginia that asked that question?
Yes, it was.
So I think, we've talked a lot about mastheads and newspapers and the use of AAP content in those contexts, but also the great option of a wholesaler, or the great benefit of a wholesaler, is that it provides for a number of voices and all sorts of uses. So it's actually having a wholesaler has a product that they can take out to new media and platforms that we don't know that exist yet, that may exist in 5 years' time.
Yeah. No, well, that's interesting. Again, I know a lot of this is a bit grim and scary, but I really, hearing you talk about this today, like the idea of a paper of record, well, it sounds like we're heading towards the newswire of record.
Yeah.
That if papers...
I like that. I think I'll use that.
Well, that's why I'm giving it to you.
Yeah.
It's free though, so it must be worthless.
I think if your government gets this right, then in a few years' time, people are going to be beating their way to your doors to understand how you structured it, how is it working, because I think it'll be a fantastic outcome if you can fund your national news agency.
Yeah, great. Well, we're nearly out of time, so we should wrap it up there. I'm not quite sure how many people we had on today. I didn't get that text, but thank you so much for coming on. Clive and Emma, you've just, yeah, you've opened my eyes to A, something I'm now more scared about, but B, something I'm a bit more hopeful about. And, in the think tank business, that's what we like to do, solve problems. But yeah, I didn't realize the problem was quite this big. But Emma, I got to assure you, if the solution's money, I tell you what, you're in the right town.
Great. Fantastic.
Don't believe the hype. When they tell you there's no money, there is so much money.
It feels like that,
It's
doesn't it?
just not for you today. No, but that's democracy, right?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
Someone wins, someone loses.
Yeah.
We can afford to give half our gas away for free. I reckon we can afford to give Newswire services the support they need. So Emma and Clive, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your trip to Australia.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.